France, like other European powers, was drawn to Africa by a potent mixture of motivations. The allure of vast resources, untapped markets, and strategic advantage proved irresistible. Africa possessed a wealth of natural resources, including rubber, diamonds, and timber. The continent also offered new markets for manufactured goods. France was driven by intense rivalry with other European powers, particularly Great Britain. The scramble for Africa became a high-stakes competition for prestige and global dominance. Each nation sought to outmaneuver the other, claiming vast territories. The Franco-Prussian War defeat added a bitter note of revenge. Expanding their colonial empire offered a chance to restore national pride. This desire for revenge, coupled with economic ambitions, fueled France's determination. The allure of Africa, with its promise of riches and strategic advantage, proved too strong for France to resist. The scramble for colonies had a profound impact on both Europe and Africa for generations to come. The scramble for Africa threatened to plunge European powers into a chaotic free-for-all. To avert this danger, European leaders convened in Berlin in 1884–85. This pivotal event, known as the Berlin Conference, aimed to regulate the colonization and trade in Africa. It established a set of rules for the partition of Africa, essentially carving up the continent among the European powers. The conference, however, was marked by a profound disregard for the existing political and ethnic boundaries in Africa. African leaders were entirely excluded from these discussions that sealed their fate. This disregard for African perspectives laid the groundwork for future conflicts and instability. The Berlin Conference marked a turning point in African history. It formalized the process of colonization and ushered in an era of European dominance over the continent. The arbitrary borders drawn in Berlin continue to have a lasting impact on Africa, shaping the political geography and fueling ethnic tensions in many parts of the continent. With the rules of the game established in Berlin, France moved aggressively to expand its colonial possessions in Africa. By the early 20th century, France had amassed the second-largest colonial empire in Africa, second only to Great Britain. This vast empire stretched across the continent, encompassing a diverse array of territories and peoples. In West Africa, France established control over a large swathe of territory, including Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast, and Guinea. In North Africa, Algeria became a prized possession, fiercely contested by the indigenous population. French influence also extended into Central Africa, with the acquisition of territories like Chad, Gabon, and the Congo Basin. This rapid expansion was achieved through a combination of military conquest, treaties with local rulers, and shrewd diplomacy. The acquisition of these colonies was often accompanied by resistance from the indigenous populations, who fiercely defended their lands and way of life. However, France's superior military technology and ruthless tactics ultimately prevailed, solidifying their control over these vast territories. Section 4. The Iron Fist in the Velvet Glove Methods of French Colonial Control. France employed a variety of methods to establish and maintain control over its African colonies. Central to their approach was the concept of assimilation. This policy aimed to absorb the indigenous populations into French culture and society, erasing their existing identities and replacing them with French language, customs, and laws. While presented as a civilizing mission, assimilation was often a coercive process, enforced through education systems, legal codes, and social structures, designed to privilege French culture and values. However, true assimilation was never fully realized. In practice, a system of association emerged, where a small African elite was granted limited access to French privileges, while the majority remained marginalized and exploited. To maintain order and suppress dissent, France relied on a combination of military force and local collaborators. They established colonial armies, often staffed with African soldiers led by French officers, to quell rebellions and enforce their rule. They also cultivated alliances with local chiefs and rulers, granting them limited authority and privileges in exchange for their loyalty and cooperation. This system of indirect rule allowed France to maintain control with a relatively small European administration. but at the cost of exacerbating existing social and ethnic divisions. Section 5. Scars on the Land and the Soul. The impact of French colonization. The impact of French colonization on African societies was profound and multifaceted. Economically, French colonialism led to the exploitation of Africa's natural resources to fuel industrial growth in France. African economies were restructured to serve French interests, with cash crops like coffee, cocoa, and cotton replacing traditional subsistence agriculture. This shift in agricultural practices often led to food shortages and created a dependence on European markets. Infrastructure development, such as railways and ports, primarily served the purpose of facilitating the extraction of resources and connecting African economies to French markets. Socially, French colonial policies disrupted traditional social structures and undermined indigenous cultures. The imposition of French language and customs eroded local languages and traditions, creating a divide between those who assimilated and those who clung to their cultural heritage. The introduction of Western education systems, while offering some opportunities for advancement, often instilled French values and denigrated African knowledge systems. This cultural dissonance created a lasting legacy of identity crisis and social fragmentation. Section 6. Echoes of Empire France and Africa today. The legacy of French colonialism continues to shape the relationship between France and its former African colonies. Despite gaining independence in the mid-20th century, many African nations still grapple with the challenges of colonialism's aftermath. The arbitrary borders drawn during the colonial era continue to fuel ethnic tensions and conflicts in many parts of the continent. Economically, many former French colonies remain dependent on France, their economies closely tied to the former colonial power. France continues to exert significant influence in its former colonies through economic agreements, military cooperation, and political interventions. This ongoing influence has been a source of both cooperation and tension. While France has provided development aid and supported peacekeeping efforts in some instances, it has also been accused of propping up corrupt regimes and prioritizing its own economic interests over the needs of its former colonies. Section 7. A Legacy of Complexity. Assessing France's African Empire. France's African Empire left an indelible mark on both the colonizer and the colonized. The economic and political landscapes of both Europe and Africa were irrevocably altered by this period of European dominance. While colonialism brought some advancements in infrastructure and education, these benefits were often overshadowed by the exploitation, oppression, and cultural disruption that lay at the heart of the colonial project. Today, France is grappling with the complex legacy of its colonial past. There is a growing recognition of the need to acknowledge the injustices of colonialism and to forge a new relationship with its former colonies based on equality and mutual respect. However, the path to reconciliation is fraught with challenges, as France navigates its economic and political interests in the region while confronting the enduring legacy of its colonial past.